again and welcome to Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd and we're so glad you could join us again for another fun program and good gardening. Today we're going to take a look at raised beds, growing herbs, and we'll check out how hops are harvested. Starting off today's program, we'll be focusing on planting media for containers. What's great about that is you can either buy a ready-made potting mix or you can make your own by following a few simple guidelines. You know, it used to be if you were going into a garden center to buy a potting mix for whatever you wanted to grow in the garden, in a container, in a greenhouse, on your windowsill, it was pretty easy. You went in and you bought a bag, and that was about the end of it. Well, as with so many other things in the world, it's become a bit more complicated, and that's probably a good thing. We grow so many different kinds of plants in containers that really have very specific needs, and that also includes what they need for their root system. In general, potting mixes really should be well drained. The only exception to that might be, of course, the water plants. You might have a bog garden or something like that. They need a different kind of a media. But if it's cacti, if it is starting seeds from scratch, if it is bromeliads or house plants, you really do need to take a look at what is in that potting mix. The interesting thing about what has happened is you can now buy very specific one ingredient bags of whatever and mix your own. Charcoal, as an example. We think of that as activated charcoal as being something you use in aquariums, in pools, same sort of thing. In a terrarium, it can form a drainage layer. It can take away those odors of sort of nasty, watery kinds of things. Perlite has long been an ingredient in a lot of standard potting mixes, so is vermiculite. You can buy a bag that is 100% peat moss, which has been inoculated, if you will, with mycorrhizae and worm castings. So rather than just being the peat moss, it has a little bit more nutritional value to it. And of course, if you have tried to do anything with worm castings or purchase that, that's a pretty great additive. So you can do a mix your own. If you are a cactus grower, you probably already know that cacti really want to grow in the rocks, in the sand. You can buy those things again all by themselves and mix your own media for your containers. Now, if you really don't want to go down that road, if it's a whole lot easier for you to buy a one-size-fits-all, you still have options in the gardening world. And that would include a lot of mixes that are currently that combination of the right ingredients. They may have fertilizers added. They may have a slow-release fertilizer. That means that you don't have to add any additional fertilization during 4 to 6 months. And that kind of takes a little bit of that, did I remember to fertilize my plants, out of the equation. You can also buy mixes that do contain worm castings. Bat guano is one of the ingredients we see on some of those bags. In any case, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are looking very specifically at the bags of media that contain what you are going to need to use to grow the plants that you want to grow in your containers in the location where they're going to be successful. Your growing media is extremely important, which is true for both your garden soil and your containers. And as we've just seen, you can either grab a complete mix or customize it to match your plant's needs. Up next on today's program is our Go Gardening feature. This week we're going to tell you a great way to get started in gardening without having to tear up your backyard. A simple raised bed is good for spring and fall gardens as well as throughout the growing season. You might want to go garden without having to turn up your whole backyard. In that case, consider doing raised beds. They're pretty easy to construct. You have some 2x, you have some 4x4 posts, and a few screws to hold them together. You might be putting up hoops, you might be putting up a trellis. What you will want to consider is if you're going into the fall gardening season, let's choose some things that are cool season crops. You will want to put in really good soil and make sure it's well drained. So again, that soil medium is really essential if you're going to start going and gardening correctly. And then you're going to choose things like beets, carrots, radishes, collards,
peas that will actually withstand those cooler night temperatures and give you the crop that you want. You will want to plant those by looking at the date on the seed package, and you're really looking at days to maturity. So if you back yourselves up into the first part of August and it's just deadly hot and you have something that is going to take a long season to mature, that may not be the right choice. Short season things such as radishes, you can start and then hope it is not too hot, but if it does get too hot, you simply harvest early and you may actually have the chance to do another crop. You will watch as always for pests and diseases, but you'll notice also that you can pack your vegetables in pretty tightly in a raised bed. It's pretty intense gardening, and then go ahead and harvest as things become mature. We have a great crop in here of kohlrabi that is almost ready. Our radishes actually did bolt, and we also have some roly-poly damage on them, which is interesting. This is collard greens, which is one of those greens that is actually making sort of a resurgence or becoming popular in the Great Plains states, even though it has been popular in the South for a long time. What you also might want to consider is if you want to extend that season even further, even if you are a beginning gardener, you can use the hoops. You'll leave the covering off of those hoops so that the plants can get all the sun, all the moisture, all the warmth they need. Perhaps then go ahead and pull that very first fall crop out and put in a crop in the spring. The nice thing about the hoops also and the raised beds is that you'll find that the soil will actually warm up sooner in the spring. So if you get the crop from the fall out, you can start even earlier in the spring with your planting than you can if you're going into the soil that you have amended in the ground. So it is a great alternative to be able to begin gardening in a very small restricted space, see how well it works out for you to do that before you go to the effort and maybe the expense of plowing up a whole portion of your yard. And of course, as with any gardening where you're growing vegetables for consumption and flowers that need some sun, choose your site wisely. If it's in too much shade, if it's poorly drained, if you actually don't have access to a water source to be able to water it, you're going to have a bit of trouble. Those all are going to apply whether you're gardening in the ground or you're gardening in a raised bed.
Raised beds are a great idea to try if you're just starting out in the gardening world or you're old to it. Their versatility can help you get started earlier in the spring and keep gardening well into the fall with the addition of some hoops and some plastic covering. A well-constructed raised bed will give you years of satisfaction, fun, and way too many vegetables. In this week's landscape lesson, we're going to talk about herbs. Herbs are always a nice addition to a home garden, but you can also pretty easily grow them indoors during the winter months. And fresh herbs will always make that home cooking sizzle. You know, in the winter months, there's hardly anything that sounds better to eat than a little piece of your own fresh herbs in that spaghetti sauce or that soup. So you too could grow your own herbs on the windowsill if you do a couple of things. First off, make sure you choose really good, healthy, well-grown plants. And that's pretty easy to see. You look for good foliage, you look for not diseases, no insect pests, nice green color or silver color. If it's a sage, you don't want green sage necessarily. And you look for a decent root system. You know, the bigger the better typically, because it's going to adapt more easily to the conditions in your own home, which are unlikely to be like a greenhouse. You want to make sure when you buy those herbs, you have them well wrapped if you're going to take them out of their lovely, nice, moist, warm, sunny environment and transport them to the car. And for heaven's sakes, don't leave them sitting while you go grocery shopping. You want to make sure also that they have enough light. One of the things that we do find with growing herbs in the house on a windowsill is either not enough light or too dry or too wet. And the too wet, of course, goes to what is the soil in which, or the media in which they're growing, and how often have you been watering them. Now, most herbs, as people who use them know, need to be pinched, pruned, and eaten. That's the whole point. So you want to make sure that you do that with your herbs as well, so that they will continue to push new foliage. If you purchase them properly, you manage them correctly, you eat them right, which is pretty easy to do, you are likely to be able to keep them through the rest of the long winter months. You may even be able to use them outside in herb gardens or in containers on your patio so that you have multi-season use of something that is actually even still a really good house plant. You have lots of choices, basil, parsley, sages, things like cilantro. So you can really pick and choose based both on the quality of the plant. You like its texture and its form. Maybe you like the way it looks. You don't really care if you're going to eat it, but you can also then pick and choose based on the ones that you cook with. So go ahead, take a peek, enjoy, take a piece, take a bite, and grow the herbs inside on your own windowsill. That's the fun part about herbs. Not only can you cook with fresh herbs, but some can also be really ornamental and brighten up any home kitchen. We've got a real treat for you for this week's interview. I had the pleasure to talk to Amy Seiler from the Nebraska Forest Service about some fantastic plants that grow in the western part of our state. We'll see some evergreens and some other native plants that give wonderful winter interest and would be great selections for gardeners out west. I am really excited to be able to be talking to Amy Seiler today. She drove all the way in from Scottsbluff, Nebraska. She is community forestry specialist from that end of the state, and she is going to be talking about some of the differences between here and there in the great state of Nebraska. Get started a little bit with the things that will give us winter interest in the Panhandle and points west, because of course they're going to be a little bit different than what people try to use in central east and eastern Nebraska.
Certainly, and as both you and I both know, winter interest is so important because our winters are so long here. And so a lot of the plants that we like to utilize have lots of different textural elements, different colors, different tones. And so probably one of the first ones that I want to highlight is something that you wouldn't normally think that we could grow out in western Nebraska, and this is called curl-leaf mountain mahogany. And what it is a broadleaf evergreen that will grow out west. It's a plant that's actually native to southwest Colorado, down into Arizona, New Mexico, and it's a plant that has a really thin, very deep green leaf. It's not only a broadleaf evergreen, but the unique thing is that it's drought tolerant also. It handles really low relative humidity and does very, very well with limited water. That would be one of the first ones. This is a plant that you can use as a large shrub or a small tree, and it gets about 20 feet tall, and it's very unique in the landscape.
So Amy, that would perhaps be a western substitute on steroids for the boxwood that we use here, correct?
Most certainly, yes. And to be quite honest, I've never really seen this plant have any winter burn on it, whereas the boxwood that we attempt to grow out west, if we do get it to go, it will have severe dieback and winter burn. So this is a great alternative. It will get a little bit bigger for sure, and the appearance may seem a little bit more wild and gnarly, but I think that just kind of goes with the landscape out there.
All right, the Wild West.
So the Wild West, yes. Another great plant that I brought to highlight is regular rabbit brush. And there's two kinds. There's a dwarf rabbit brush, which gets about 18 to 24 inches tall. And what I have right here today, this is typical rabbit brush, and that gets about 3 to 5 feet tall. It can get taller if it has more water, but it generally is in around the 5-foot range. The reason that this plant is so ideal, it doesn't hold its foliage in the winter, but it does have these lovely lime green stems and this very, very beautiful seed head. So we like to utilize this plant just to give us some texture. And the thing that I love about a lot of these western plants, Kim, is that when they're backlit by the sunlight, they just stand out and look amazing.
You know, Amy, we have tried this on campus in a couple of spots just because it is so incredibly beautiful. It's in the aster family, so you get those gold flowers as well. We don't have much luck. And you know, you mentioned backlit, and I think off air you talked about another plant that you love, which certainly we can't grow, winterfat.
Winterfat, yes, and that is another one that its seed head is absolutely beautiful as the sun hits it, particularly in the winter. It looks really good. But the other positive thing about that is it has silvery foliage that, so we would consider that a broadleaf, not evergreen, but as you would maybe say, evergray. And it has that really attractive silver foliage, and that really can add something attractive to a stark landscape in the winter.
All right, talk for just a second about pines, because I see some pines sitting in front of you.
I brought some great pines that we should probably be incorporating a little bit more of into our landscapes. And the first one that I have, this is bristlecone pine. And this one is very, very drought tolerant. And it has a really unique appearance to it. It looks kind of like the bristles on a brush, and that's kind of why they call it bristlecone pine. This one is not a large pine like a ponderosa pine. It's more of a medium size, about 25 to 30 foot tall, but it can handle the high pH soils that you'll encounter in central and western Nebraska. It does not like a lot of water, does not like heavy soil, so it's one that does much better after you hit possibly North Platte and west. The other one that I brought, this one is actually native to western Nebraska, and this is limber pine. This is kind of what we try to use in place of white pine out west when you kind of want that subtle, soft pine appearance. This does not tend to winter burn. It has beautiful cones on it. It does have a nice pyramidal shape to it. It gets about 30 to 40 feet tall. In the landscape, probably not as tall in the wild just because of the rugged conditions that we'll typically find it in, which is right down by Kimball, Nebraska.
Perfect. And you brought a whole lot of other things, and I think we're probably almost out of time. But if we are, what we're going to do is suggest maybe that you talk to us again later on another segment about all of the beauty of western Nebraska.
Perfect. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Amy. These selections offer seasonal interest and will give you that texture and some color during those long western winters. Amy will return next time on Lifestyle Gardening to tell us about more selections for western Nebraska. Alrighty, let's take a few minutes now to answer our viewer emails. We'd really love to hear from you. Perhaps you can also share a picture or two with us. Just send us an email to byf@unl.edu. Our first question this week comes from the Hastings area, and it's a question about those tree bags that you see on new trees, especially the ones that are planted in public right-of-way or in city parks. They're kind of a green thing. They're usually down lower than the stake, and the viewer is wondering whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. Well, the answer is yes, and yes, depending on how you actually manage those tree bags. The idea, of course, is that you can put them around a new tree, fill them with water, and then the material will allow that water to soak slowly into the root ball. The positive aspect of that, of course, is it's a way to get water to the new trees. The downside is that it can actually just put water on one side of that new root ball, but more importantly, if they are enclosing the trunk entirely, one of the issues that can happen is you can get all sorts of rots and spots in there. You can get insects flying in. So you really need to pay attention and watch those bags and make sure you take them off before they create that perfect environment for something to live against the trunk of that new tree that you might not want. Our second question comes from a viewer in Kearney. And they have the old-fashioned Van Hoot spirea. And they've noticed that a lot of those spirea have been pruned back right now or have gone all the way to the ground with these spirea. And they're wondering if the timing is right on that. Well, it's hard to kill the big old Van Hoot spirea, but unfortunately, they bloom on what we call old wood, one-year-old wood, which means that if pruning has happened now, chances are you're not going to get great flowering this spring, if any at all. So the ideal time to prune those old Van Hoot spireas is after they flower, you know, April or May, prune them back then, and at the same time, if you possibly can, take some of the dead wood out, so that helps rejuvenate them. So wait if you haven't already done it. If you already have, you probably have not killed them, but the chances of getting good flowering this spring are slim and none. Let's see, our third question actually does come from Scotts Bluff. And this is a viewer who wonders about getting better color in their red twig dogwood, but it appears from the photograph like a couple of things have happened. First off, it's maybe been rounded over, the shrub has been rounded over, meaning the pruning cuts have taken place all at the same point, and you get kind of this witch's broom or twiggy appearance in the top. The second thing you can notice is there is an awful lot of brownish or dead looking or gray twiggage or canes in that shrub, and that could be a couple of things. First off, pretty congested with all those new stems in there. Could be some canker, and red twig dogwoods are prone to canker. And more importantly, especially if you want the color in the red twig dogwoods, you do need to make sure you keep some of that wood renewed. So the first thing I would suggest to this particular viewer is take out all of that dead or discolored material first. You're opening up the interior of the plant, getting rid of some of that inoculum for diseases, more air circulation. Then take a look at what you've got for older canes. Take out about a third of those, and that will begin to rejuvenate or renew that shrub. You can take some of the height down, but if you can, try to feather cut or stagger it so you're not cutting all at the same location in that plant. Our fourth question for the week is from a Norfolk viewer. They have an old red bud in a pretty protected location, but it's a pretty ancient old beast and kind of getting thin on the top, so not much foliage left. It does still flower, but they noticed just this past season a crack that seems to extend all the way from the very first branches down to the ground. They haven't noticed it before. They're wondering what in the world might have happened, and is there anything they can do about it? Well, first off, that's probably a red bud that is soon to be a dead bud, and that's pretty old for a red bud, but that crack is indicative of some pretty major structural issues. It may have been something that was triggered years and years ago by a poor root connection. It could also have been some twisting, some wind shear that really didn't open that crack in the trunk until just recently. Dry weather, again, additional wind could have opened that crack up. And you know, the likelihood of that tree surviving, we certainly don't recommend putting a bolt through it or putting a bungee cord around it. But the likelihood of that tree surviving that kind of damage is slim and none. And you'd hate to have that tree fall over and, you know, damage the house or fall on somebody as they're walking up to the front walk. For our final feature today, we're going to return to the topic of hops. If you've been following Backyard Farmer and Lifestyle Gardening, you know UNL Agronomy and Horticulture is currently researching the viability of growing hops here in the state. We've featured breeding and a commercial hops grower, and right now we'd like to show you the process of harvesting our first hops crop, which was planted just north of the Backyard Farmer Garden.
We're getting closer to harvest with our hops project through the University of Nebraska. A little bit closer to that nice, crisp, cold adult malt beverage. So of course what we have to do is figure out how to get the hops off the vine. Stacy, do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of machine that a home brewer would use in doing their harvesting, and whether in fact they also may have to go to a little bit of hand picking to get all those hops off?
So in the commercial industry, they're using cone strippers basically to remove the cone off of the vine, and that's kind of a challenge because there's no machinery in the U.S., so a lot of it's being imported from Germany. But there are a couple companies that make a machine that's designed for smaller growers that are under 2 acres. However, the home grower is probably going to end up doing it all by hand.
All right, as with any piece of equipment, sometimes there are a few kinks to work out and some bugs to figure out. What do you think are going to be the issues that we hope to get resolved before we send this out and help our collaborators get their harvest managed?
So we're looking at how to adjust the machine. It's going to take some practice because we have different varieties, and it has to do with the plant structure itself. So there's a few wheels that we have to adjust in order to not tear the plant apart, but harvest as many cones as possible. With any machine, we are finding there's a certain amount of cones that are going out through the litter, and our goal is to reduce that as much as possible. So for the research, I think some of the data will be just going on and hand picking it, because when you're doing it commercially, you can tolerate a little bit of loss. So that's what we're trying to optimize on, is reducing that loss.
Once we get those hops out of the chute and into the bin, what happens next? Do they go into cold storage? Do we pack them in little baggies and carry them into the kitchen? Do they go right into the brew vat?
So as soon as the cones are removed from the plant, we don't have a lot of time to handle them because they have very high moisture, around 80% moisture. So they do need to go through some sort of a drying system. It's not heating really, we just need to blow air through it. We have to bring that moisture content down as quick as possible. A home person might use something like a food dehydrator to do it, or they might just have a screen with a fan blowing up underneath. Commercially, that's what they basically are, is just large screens with fans blowing there. So once the moisture content has been brought down, they're either compressed into bales, or they can be packed into some packages and vacuum sealed, and then they can be refrigerated to hold them till they're ready for distribution.
Stacy, in the green and growing world, a lot of pathogens can transfer on equipment. Is that something that we're going to be worried about with a harvester, especially if home brewers go into more of a co-op situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a concern because we need to make sure that we can keep our fields clean and virus-free. And what we're finding is that the cutting of the bind at the base is where there's a vulnerability for these viruses to be transferred. So there does have to be a clean program figured out, or some sort of protocol by the grower itself. So that's something we need to look at.
Thanks, Stacy. You know, this is the year that all of our collaborators got to play. Next year we'll be coming back with exactly which ones of these vines had the greatest productivity.
We've got a couple more years on our hops research project. We've already learned so much going through this process, and I'm sure we'll show you more during the upcoming Backyard Farmers season this spring. And that's our program for this week. Next time we'll be featuring mail-order plants and taking cuttings. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So good afternoon, good gardening, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time on Lifestyle Gardening.